Cheers. Got my coffee. So, welcome back to my humble abode. This is my shop. I keep it real. I don't have some crazy studio or dark room or anything like that. So, if you don't like how my videos come out, I'm sorry. I try my best with what I got. Not to get rant heavy, but to start it off, I'm going to be tying a CDC Stonefly pattern today. You probably can't see it very well here, but it's a simple two material plus thread fly. I like these kinds. I like to show them to people. They were shown to me back in the day. CDC is kind of like my material of the month in my newsletter, and talking about it's relatively, I would say, if you were to look at the grand scheme of things in regards to the materials that we tie with, it's still relatively new. It's only been around and used regularly in the last 40 years. The 90s is when it was really popularized, believe it or not. But it's a wonderful material. It has some pros and cons, and it's definitely got some things you can get crazy with. I know the one who's popularized it the most, and if you've ever had the opportunity to sit at one of the shows and watch him tie with it, Mark Pettigian does some amazing things with CDC that he makes look very easy. And I will tell you that some of the techniques that he uses aren't super easy. They take a little bit of time and effort to kind of get relatively proficient at using them. One of the biggest things that comes into play with CDC is, it's like any material, using the right feather, or the correct size, shape, stem dimensions, whether the stem's pliable or not. Those all kind of things come into play. Ideally, it's kind of like working with mallard. If you're using mallard, like in, say, a zoo cougar, you don't want one that's all bent and curved and twisted, because it's going to change how that fly tracks. It's the same thing with CDC. If you're going to be tying your CDC in, and it's going to be laid flat across the back of a fly, you don't want feathers that are all twisted and curled and doing all this other stuff, because the fly is going to twist when you cast it, etc. So pick the right stuff. I talk about that more in my newsletter, but I digress. I'm not going to get rant heavy this week. Did see some funny things online though about tips for production tying, and Brian Weiss, if you hear this, I know I talked to you about it. I busted you a little bit about, it sounds more like an infomercial for all the latest and greatest new gadgets you might have just gotten from some of the companies you work with. Hey, you know me, I keep it real. It is what it is. I'm going to stay in my lane though. I production tie, so I have a lot of tidbits and things that might benefit you, even if you just tie 2 flies a year or 20,000 flies a year. So it's kind of like, if this is what you do, then you might have some good tips in there. His tips were pretty good, but there's a lot of other things that we could delve into at another date. I won't get into it today, but the biggest thing, and here's a tip before we start, is just preparing your materials ahead of time, laying them out in the order that they're going to be affixed to the hook, whether you're tying 1 or 100. Okay, I just did, and you probably saw the picture on Instagram. It was only like 18 or 20 dozen streamers, but they're articulated, so it's like, that's really like 36 or 40 dozen flies, because you're talking 2 parts, right? So if I didn't spend the time selecting the proper materials and setting them all up, it would have taken me 4 to 8 times longer to tie this huge batch of flies that's going to the local shop. So prep your materials. Choose the right ones. So then all you have to do, and I like to line my stuff up in the order that I'm going to be affixing it to the hook. And when you do that, it's basically a production line. I grab this to start here, and it all goes from there. There's a bunch of good guys out there who have done a lot to shorten the curve with production tying. One of the ones that comes to mind the most is probably Drew Chacon. He's done a lot of good things. I've borrowed some ideas from him, and a few of us have. Hairline makes these now, but they're just staging forms with foam. In fact, I got to mail a couple out to a guy. Little things like that, setting all your hooks aside, getting your thread out, flash. I mean, Drew takes it to the nth degree. I am very organized and neat, but my bench, I have a little Greg Senyo in me. Shout out to my buddy Greg. My bench will get messy at times. That's just how I work. I'll clean it after. You know, but there's a method to my madness and whatever works for you. But you got to have some order in there. If you just haphazardly, you know, just pick and grab and do stuff here and there, especially if you're tying in succession, it's going to take you a lot longer. So, you know, neatly and efficiently hand pick your materials ahead of time, set them up in the order that you tie. It's kind of like what I did with this video. As you'll see, I've got my 3 CDC feathers set aside. I've got my scissors right there. I got the feather that I'm going to use to tie this and my thread, and that's it. If I wasn't running my yap, I probably would have tied this fly in, I don't know, 90 seconds. So, I don't know about you. I like to fish probably a lot more, even though I enjoy tying flies, which people think I'm crazy. Probably am. I like to fish more, so I'd rather spend more time out there than in here. That's it. So, today, like I said, we're going to tie this CDC Stonefly. Hope you like it. It's super, super easy. It's a different style technique. Very, very easy set of skills to tie one of these. You don't need to be, you know, some crazy, have all these wild and crazy skills. You can be an absolute beginner and tie one of these that will come out pretty good, and it would catch fish. So enough of me talking. Let's get to tying. What we're going to be tying, as I just drop it, is one of these little CDC style stoneflies. Reason why we're doing this one today is they're starting to become relatively prevalent this time of year, and we're seeing them at a pretty regular clip. This fly legitimately is only, with the thread, is 3 materials, so you don't feel too bad if you lose these. They float really great, and if there's stoneflies on the water, they work well. You can alter the colors to adjust to any kind of stoneflies you get. This time of year, I typically do blacks in like an 18 and the browns in like a 14, and within the next few weeks, these things are really going to start coming into play. So we're going to tie a size 14 today in brown. What I like to do, because we're going to use CDC for the body in dubbed form, basically going to pull some of the fibers off of a feather. I like to use a contrasting colored thread, so either I'll use like a dark brown or black if the body's darker brown, or like for this one I'm using kind of like a rusty brown. So that'll give me a nice little, rib. We're going to start roughly about the spot where I think I want the wing and my legs to start, and then I'm just going to work my thread back down the shank of the hook, about to the point where you'd think a barb on the hook would be, and then we're going to come right back to a point right about where we started. That's just to give me a nice little thread base. Now, when I go to use, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Mark Pettigan has got a brilliant way of tying in CDC feathers by the tip and then winding them down the hook. He does it and makes it look so easy. It's an acquired skill, I will say. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a CDC feather. You can see this one's bent. It's got a kink in it. It's kind of broken at the stem. We're going to take this CDC and just pull it off of either side of that feather, and we're going to use that as dubbing. You're probably only going to dub, and you want it the nice thin uniform noodle. This about maybe 2 inches worth of thread on there, okay? And we're going to dub it, and we're going to start it right where our wing is going to go and work our way backwards. Don't be concerned if you have any fibers that are kind of falling off here or a little unruly. You'll see why in a second. We'll go right to that point where we wanted our thread to start, and then we're going to take our thread and wind it back through like a counter rib, half hitch it. And that's going to help fortify some of that CDC in dubbing. And then you can just take your scissors, kind of come through and trim any errant fibers that are on there. You see here. Now, next thing we're going to do, and this isn't a technique that I devised or came up with, this has been around for quite some time. We're going to take 2, and you could use just 1 if you wanted, but I like the way 2 feathers work together better than 1, because when they split on the wing, as you'll see, it'll look more like a pair of wings on the back of this particular fly. So we're going to take the two CDC feathers together, and you want ones that are straight, nice straight fibers. Lay them on top of each other, and we're going to tie them in by the base. So you'll see where the base is here. We're going to take one loose turn over that. One, hold it in place, pull up on it, and then we're going to take those two pieces together while keeping thread tension on there and pull them out to the back of the fly like you see here. After we've done that, we're going to take a couple turns over it. Now's the time if you need to manipulate this, because what you want to do is you want those to lay flat right on the top, right over the top of that body that you've tied. And if you look at the stoneflies, their wings go back past where their body is. So I want to pull this out just past there. We'll clip this stem off after. Bind that down. Take a turn in front. Go back up and over it. What I like to do now is I'll take two, is you can come in here, trim that off. If you want to leave a little bit on there for some fluff, you can. You can trim those out later, so you've only got like one for an antenna. That's completely up to you. I like to leave a little bit on there. I'll just cut them like so. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take one hackle from a whiting silver red labeled dry fly hackle. This one is in a Coachman Brown. These are fantastic. One of these will hackle hundreds and hundreds of bugs. Same thing. We're going to tie it so the convex side is against the hook. I like to trim a little bit away so I have something to bind that thread to. Take about 5 or 6 turns over it, and then we're just going to wrap our hackle. 1 turn, 2, 3. You can do a 4th if you want. It's entirely up to you. Take a look at how it is. These are small flies. So I'm going to advance that right in front of that pile. Take 1 turn over it if I can. Try not to catch all those fibers, as you see here. So I may have to do it like this. Terrible lighting here. 1, 2. Take your thumb, push it right up, go right in front of it. Put a 1/2 inch on there so it doesn't come undone. Get in there with your scissors. Trim all that stuff away. Then you can take your whip finish, peel those fibers back, make a nice neat head, trim it off. See here. Next thing I like to do, if you get any fibers that come out, just trim those off. Take those 2 tips, and you don't want to cut all the way back in there because then you're going to lose that little rounded edge on your feather, which makes it look more like a real wing. You see here, I like my patterns that are hackled like this to lay flat, so I'll come in here underneath and I'll trim out those little hackle fibers so they're flat like you see here. That's pretty much the fly. Ain't nothing to it. But you got a nice little CDC style stonefly. You could use it as a caddis if you want to. These hackle fibers on top are going to make it so that you can see the fly when it's on the water. The downside to fishing these this time of year is usually you've got some sort of terrible glare you're dealing with, and especially when you're fishing the tiny black ones, it makes it really difficult to see these flies on the surface if you're making something that's relatively flat. So having that little hackle on the top will actually help you see this fly. You can also, if you're really inclined and your eyesight's gone bad, you can add in another piece of CDC that's a lighter color on the top there, or a small piece of a foam cylinder. But that's it. I call this like a bubble wing. So that's it. Hit it with some CDC floating and call it a day. That's about it. Hope you enjoyed it. And just clean it up a little bit. That's the fly. Have a good day.